And where do I want to be? We'll go to our GitHub page and then I'll get ourselves started. Cool. So I don't want to share the app just yet. So welcome to our fifth or fourth meetup. So today I don't have much. We'll mainly be going over homework 4, and I ended up adding a few more examples for module 4.5. I just added them to a branch, so I'll have to merge that. But once I merge that, then it'll be in master. But I'll show everyone just a few more examples that I ended up adding for the Flask API. What we're sort of going over for module 4.5. So I'll first start by just talking, in general about, sort of what I'm expecting with modules 4.5 and kind of module 5 as well. So as I mentioned, sort of throughout the course, module 4.5, like we had sort of a different meetup schedule. So I wanted to, find something to, give us some extra content to go through, and creating and using Flask. It's something that's pretty useful for sort of working in D3. And for these topics that we're covering, so for Flask and for module 5, which and module 6, which is sort of more geared towards your final project, we'll be getting into Flask with 4.5 and then into JavaScript with starting with module 5. And for both of these, it's I sort of want to frame the content as, it's understood that this isn't a web development course. It's something that, it will help, like Flask will help in terms of using D3, and, just in terms of the visualization, ecosystem. D3 is, it's definitely something that I think everyone should at least have exposure to. But obviously, there's a lot to web development. There is a lot to JavaScript. So especially, when it comes to Flask and Python, or when it comes to Flask itself, and when it comes to JavaScript, the goal is really to, not become experts, but really to, become almost, to sort of know enough to get yourselves into trouble. So if, especially with, the Flask API and when you're working with D3, if you find, a lot of just, copying and pasting of examples, working off of the examples I'm providing, and maybe, it's more about sort of exposure, because with a lot of these tools, there's, a lot to dig into. And, so what I'm hoping is, to hopefully get you guys up to speed, enough to get some Hello World examples going. I hope that a few of you, and for the final project, which I'll speak more about later, I hope to encourage some of you to use D3 for your final, but for your final, you will have the option of using Shiny or Dash. So you have any of those options, but it's sort of really trying to encourage people to sort of take that leap if they feel they're ready to. And even as we're creating, even for people who are choosing to use D3, it's don't be too worried if there's still a lot that if it seems like there's a lot that's going on under the hood, like I'll try to sort of get everyone, at least using, and today, like I'm going to be going through, a few of the tools that allow D3 to grab data from other sources. And, but so if anyone chooses D3 as a final project, the easiest way to use D3 is to just simply use a CSV, and just simply reading in a CSV and creating your final project off of that. And then I think it's going to be pretty, for people who are choosing to use JavaScript. I think using Flask, it's something that really, sort of cements the connection between, sort of makes it easier to bring data into D3. And in addition, because you're using Flask, it lets you sort of move a lot of the data, munging, a lot of the sort of ETL work, keep that in Python, and then keep JavaScript, sort of, not move too much of that into JavaScript, because in sort of going over the overview of the class, I've mentioned that, JavaScript is, really, it's the language of the web, but it's not really meant to, deal, it's not, it doesn't match the sort of data science skill set. It's not meant to, it doesn't really, there are a few libraries out there that are sort of approaching, there's a library called Crossfilter, which is approaching, data frame style functionality, but really, tools like Python and R, if you're working with data, those are the languages you want to use. And obviously with this degree, you guys are going to be focusing on Python and R, and that's going to be really where you go if you want to do things with data. Being sort of a data visualization class and bringing in D3, and as I mentioned quite a few times, data visualization I like to sort of think of as the confluence of data science and web development. So it's totally understood that this is, that we're more geared towards the data science side of things. So I'm hoping to just get everyone sort of up to speed. Chun Tui is asking in the chat if so Chun Hui, what did you want to
Oh,
present?
I'm sorry. Typing mistake.
Oh,
Forget about it.
okay.
Sorry.
No worries. And yeah, just in the chat if you want, let me know if you do have any questions as I'm going forward. So hopefully that makes sense just in terms of an overall, sort of framing of what we're learning. And also just one more thing to add, that the nature of this course is it's, almost more of a survey where, we are jumping around a lot between different languages, and it's, so it's like each of these, and especially on the web development side, each of these tools that we're going into, we could have full courses on them, but, this is meant to really, just give everyone an idea of what's out there and really empower people to dig deeper, sort of in the specific tools they choose to dig deeper into. So and that's just like module 4.5, like it's more of a sort of sort of quicker assignment. It's not even really it's really just meant to sort of try to get people more up to speed with this. And also I lump this in with the proposal, so I'm hoping people are thinking more heavily about their proposal over the next 2 weeks. And Chunhui asked about homework 4, asking about Heroku. So and this is actually for all of the assignments, one of the things I tried to do this semester is, and this is relatively new to this semester, so I hope it wasn't too too confusing for people. But I wanted to try to gear all the assignments towards deploying of and especially things like Shiny and Dash, and when we get into JavaScript, like trying to give everyone the complete picture what of what it's like to work with apps like these. So um, we're building, we're sort of starting to build these apps locally. We're and you could run these apps locally, but if you're working with any of these tools in a professional setting, you're probably not going to be, you're probably also going to need to worry about deployment. So this kind of falls true for anything that we cover in this course, where, if you're making a Shiny app, for example, the goal is that Shiny app is going to be used by someone in your organization, usually. And so part of what you're, part of, like most of what most of the battle is learning the tool and learning how to build these data-driven apps. But there's a non-trivial part of it, which is you've built this. Now you need to make sure that other people are able to access it. And the to get back to assignment 4, I chose to make assignment 4's deployment optional because there's just a pretty steep learning curve. So it's something I sort of threw out there as, if people wanted to try to get their app deployed, they could do it. But it's something that I didn't want to waste too much time going through the details of deployment. In terms of what I wanted to cover in this course, I would rather cover the actual building of a Dash app rather than the deployment, which unfortunately could get kind of hairy. And that's a dual-edged sword because that also means you're able, it makes it when I'm dealing with clients at Plotly, we're sort of talking a lot about scalability and things like that. So it's sort of that dichotomy of it's powerful, but it is there's a bit steeper of a learning curve because of that. And in particular, there was Chunhui is mentioning that. So there's, and I'll pull this up to go through this. So short answer, Chunhui, don't worry if you weren't able to deploy it. I'll just be able to run these apps locally. But to get just a bit more into detail of this, what I believe Chunhui is referring to is the way that we've sort of framed the instructions for Dash is it's sort of framed around this sort of creation of virtual environments, and this is something that because because Python with R, it's a bit more of a sort of closed off experience when it comes to installing packages. So you've probably seen CRAN, like if you've installed packages, that's where all of the vignettes come from. And CRAN is the organization, there's sort of a singular organization that keeps pretty tight control over packages. And as a result, when deploying apps with something like Shiny apps, it's you could just sort of reference libraries and it automatically knows I'm just going to get this from CRAN, and it does that. With Python, there's sort of there's a lot of different things that go on with packages. You have a lot of you guys are using Anaconda, so there's Conda packages, so you may not even be using pip to install things, and also this is just sort of the way deployment with Python apps work. It's actually not just a Dash thing. Like if you're if you're deploying a Flask app, it would work in a very similar way, where essentially when you deploy an app, you have an empty Linux container, like it's using Docker, but you could just think of that as sort of a Linux server, and you need to specifically tell this Linux server install, first of all, install which version of Python you want, set up, and then once you set up Python, install the specific packages. So that's basically like if you think about what's really going on, it's actually even though this is pretty complex, like if you sort of think of it in terms of what you're doing is actually creating a Linux server instance and installing all of this from scratch, I'm sure you guys could imagine that could get a lot more complicated. So it's something, but something like this is still not the same as Shiny apps, and it's if you guys end up using something like Dash in your professional in wherever you guys go professionally, this will probably be the sorts of stuff you have to deal with. But for the purposes of this class, I think it's better to sort of provide this as an option, but to not allow us to get hung up on it. And Chunhui is saying that, yeah, Chunhui. So don't worry about doing it in AWS. And I actually didn't know that virtual env itself is problematic for Windows 10 or for Windows in general. Or I don't know if it's Windows in general or just Windows 10. But yeah, if there's something happening there, don't worry too much about it. One more thing I would add, though, if you do want to try, if you still want to sort of try deploying it, is the only reason we really recommend setting up a virtual environment, and actually, I thought we had a Windows version of this, but yeah. So, and I'll dig more into sort of what's happening with virtual environment and Windows. But the reason why we recommend why in the instructions we sort of recommend creating a virtual environment is just for testing purposes. So one of the things that, like, if you deploy an app, it happens a lot of times that an app is working locally and it's not working in the deployed environment. So this is meant to so being able to create a virtual environment allows you to more efficiently test what's happening because you're in the same environment. And one thing that is a possibility is really all that you're doing with this virtual environment is creating your requirements.txt. So really, it's just about this pip freeze requirements.txt. And one thing to try would be to just manually create a requirements.txt. And so you could just like if you pip freeze, you'll see different version numbers, but you don't even need to include those. You could just include pandas, plotly, dash, etc. So that's something else to try. But like I mentioned, like this, I don't want people to get too hung up on deploying this app. So don't worry if it seems like you're running into sort of a brick wall when working with this, because it's not. I mean, admittedly, it's not a trivial thing to work out. So back to the what I was talking about. So I mentioned about sort of Flask and JavaScript and what I'm expecting for the rest of the course. So we'll go through assignment 4, and then after that, I'll talk about the final project, and then after that, I'll talk about the additions that I made for the Flask app, and talk a bit more about the upcoming module. So first, I don't want to show off what I did just yet because this was, so with assignment three, whoop, wrong module. With assignment three, I ended up, assignment three was a bit more straightforward than assignment four. So this was a bit more comparable to some of the earlier assignments where this is really combining a lot of the themes in earlier assignments where, not only are we building a more complex, data-driven app, but we also have, some choices to make in terms of how to answer these questions. So before I show off what I ended up doing, I want to try to see, what sorts of strategies other people chose for these questions. So these questions, the first one, we're looking at the health of trees, and the question specifically is asking like what proportion of trees are for each. So first of all, for each species and each burrow, what proportion of the trees are in good, fair, or poor health according to this health variable. So what did everyone choose to what visualization type did everyone choose to visualize this? Bar chart, that works. Joel mentioned that he chose a bar chart. Kelly mentioned that she chose stacked bar chart, so choosing that by burrow, and that's totally valid also. Brian chose a map. That's interesting. I'll be interested to see that. And cool. So yeah, we have a lot of different choices here. In terms of question one, and then question two. This one I thought was a bit trickier, and the reason why is because so we were looking at the steward variable. So I sort of pointed out, which variables we're looking at. The issue is, however, that the steward variable and the health variable are both categorical variables. So part of what I was looking for was kind of how people would deal with this unique situation where we're looking for these are both categorical. They're both not you don't have that many categories, so it's not so usually if someone were asking like does X have an impact on Y, I at least for me, and I imagine for a lot of you that the one of the first things that'll come to mind is sort of looking at scatter plots and trying to get an idea of is there a correlation, so perhaps including a best fit line and being able to sort of visualize in that way what the relationship is between two numeric variables. But with something like this, it's we have two categorical variables. So what did does anyone want to share what they chose for the second question? Bar chart, so that could work in some cases. Brian, was the and was it a stacked bar chart? Yep. So and Joel mentioned stacked bar chart also. Kelly mentioned that it's also a stacked bar chart. And actually those so actually I'll show off what I chose now, and I actually now that I see so many people chose stacked bar charts, I find that pretty interesting because that's a pretty that actually gives you more information than what I ended up choosing here. So I decided to go with just a mosaic plot looking at a heat map, but actually in this case a stacked bar chart might have been that could have provided a bit more information. So what that actually gives you is, not like, first of all, it gives you sort of gives you more of a feel as to the sort of raw number of trees. So that's sort of one thing that like you get a bit more information in a stacked bar chart, whereas a mosaic plot, it's really showing like it mainly shows sort of comparing, like you sort of provide however many so in this case we have 3 by 3, so you have 9 categories, and it provides you a comparative view of the 9 categories. And also for the first question, I ended up going with a pie chart. It was, we're looking at sort of a small number of categories, so something like the pie chart is okay to use there. And yep, so Peter mentioned, and this is a very this is something I want to highlight in the in sort of when going over the app. So really, this is something that would happen. It happens in Shiny as well as Dash, and it's sort of something to think about when building data products like this. So when you're building a static visualization, you're able to more you have more power in terms of tailoring that static visualization to the data that's available. You're able to make choices with the outliers, and yeah, Chinhui asked if I could show how to connect the drop-down menus to different graphs. I'll definitely go through all of that in a bit. But just speaking in generally in terms of sort of how to think of apps like this, when you are building more static apps, you have more control over what over what you're building. So you're able to, for example, deal with outliers in a custom way. We've done that previously in previous assignments, and that's something that's harder to do in more interactive apps like this. And the reason being that, as Peter mentioned, in this particular case, we have sort of a larger data set, and we have a lot of zero counts. So there's and if you don't so basically the short answer is you need to manually deal with zero counts, and sort of make sure that the data is always in sort of a sort of in the correct shape. That doesn't mean that. So one thing to show off here, like if I select different trees, and here you could see, with so this happens especially with things like number of stewards. There's not that many trees that have larger numbers of stewards, and the and so like we're able to deal with this without sort of having kind of a prescribed like x-axis or prescribed y-axis. And I'll sort of show what that looks like in the code. But basically, and actually this I'll also point out how that ties to things like drop downs. But the real kind of philosophy behind dealing with things like this is to try to make things as dynamic as possible. So and actually I'll dig into the code here. So for things like the drop downs, like the choices within the drop downs, for example, I'm I'm dealing with those dynamically. So I'm getting my tree and burrow list from the API and and using that to populate what the drop down is. So here, this is me just bringing in the getting a list of trees, getting a list of burrows, getting a list of burrows, and then with using the drop downs as an example, um, and this is just using what's called list comprehension in Python, and it's just simply the essentially for each value of either tree list or burrow list, we just want the label and value to be the same thing. So, I'm just sort of building a list of these dictionary objects. And Sarah mentioned, I think this is related to what we're talking to, the the so the actually yeah, Sarah, that's something that I think uh, like I should have provided some information on that in the notebook. Just some strategies to deal with that because and I'll show you what I did, which will hopefully work for future just for future times you're using Python. The yeah hmm. Yeah, Peter, I'm not sure how true or false would work because the number of stewards there could be more than one, and then for anyone who had similar issues, don't worry about sort of these sorts of, at least for this assignment, don't worry about these sorts of categories being in different orders. I'll show you what I ended up doing, which will hopefully sort of help everyone out in the future. But for the time being, that was sort of a level of complexity I didn't. Uh, yeah, Peter, if you want to, you don't have to go back and fix it, but I should be fine with checking what you sent. So yeah, so basically, yeah, one of the things that I sort of when you're dealing with these sorts of categories, you like there's sort of a logical order to them. You have none, one or two, three or four, but it doesn't work too well when you're just dealing with sort of stock ordering. So I'll sort of show in a so basically, and yeah, I'll sort of get into right now what I ended up doing. So Pandas has a data type called categoricals, and one of the options of using that categoricals have is you're able to sort of set an order with them. So categoricals, these are similar to factors in R. I'm pretty sure they're stored in a similar way where they're stored as indices and you sort of map those indices to the categories. But more importantly, Pandas gives you the option to order them. So one of the most common examples this comes across is if you have a column for month and you want to order the months by sort of the months of the year. That's something that you're not able to just do alphabetically, obviously, but and what you end up doing is, like I'm just taking the column itself and redefining it as what's called a categorical, setting the categories. So and this is similar to factors in R, where first you inspect the data so that you see what the categories are, what your potential categories are, And what this lets you do is, if any of these categories are missing, it'll still, it'll still order in, it'll still sort of allow it to order, when you're throwing it into different graph types. The downside to it is you do have to, if you do use categorical data, you have to redefine it as a list, or I found it easier to just put it as a list, but I guess you could sort of redefine it as a non-categorical column. But you do need to sort of include that, when sort of feeding labels into a visualization type. So so I ended up doing that. I ended up sort of dealing with NAs. So here, Pandas has sort of another helpful function which lets you fill NAs pretty easily. So here I'm just replacing all the NAs with 0, and then that's sort of that's how, and then just in terms of getting the data into a format that that you want to work with, I'm pivoting it, like for my visualization choice type of choice. It makes more sense to pivot it because you want to end up with a matrix. For things like bar charts, it's something that's a bit, you know like pivoting would help in a bar charts case, but it's sort of a bit, like with a heat map, it was it's just sort of automatic to think you want something to be shaped a certain way, whereas with a and actually, like running into issues like this before, like even if I am making something like a bar chart or a line chart or another sort of non-matrix like visualization type, I'll sometimes use pivot to sort of arrive, kind of fill out my data. Like if I have a data frame that is, I have, like in this case, essentially I have a health column, I have a steward column, and I have counts for each each category, sort of combination of each. And when you have, when you're sort of viewing things in a flat way like that, like, and this is sort of going back to what you guys probably went through in 607, where you sort of have data in a flatter, a flat table, versus a like so using in R commands like reshape or cast, things like that. And that is that's sort of one way to, I don't want to say like cheat or hack, but like that's sort of an easy way to complete the to complete your to sort of get NAs out of that. So and Chunhui is asking again to be presenter. Sorry. um, do you want to be presenter, Chunhui, or is
Oh no, because my screen seems like a little bit different from previous the functions, that I'm not able to see the others typing, and I'm not able to restructure it. I try to I try to see the other people's typing, so I try different button. So I randomly click
oh,
something on it. I'm so sorry.
no worries, no worries. So yeah, and
My bad.
so yeah, the so basically, like pivot is, one way, and like reshaping, casting, using our terminology. That's one way to get to sort of, get your to sort of get those NAs surfaced. I actually don't know. I mean, I've always just used pivot. I don't know if there's another way. Like in R, I think there's a remembering something Cartesian. I'm forgetting the exact function that R has, but there's but there are function, there's sort of a specific function in R that you have categories like this that if you were to pivot them, you would have missing values, and it sort of automatically fills those in for you. So so Pandas sort of deals with that in a similar way. And then getting back to sort of thematically, what we're talking about here, this is one of the things that you need to think about when you are building an app like this. So you could sort of think of these as edge cases. So if you're like when you're building an app like this, you're allowing a user to make different choices, and you don't you don't know how it. Um, so actually, this is one where I thought it must have been fully NAs in number of stewards, but this was actually this happens to be a case that I didn't even like something that I didn't end up foreseeing. I would have liked to try to get something showing up here that that would give something other than a blank graph. And actually, one so to sort of show how I dealt with sort of these kinds of edge cases. So one thing I wanted to control for was if actually I think what I meant to have there was I think this was sort of a code artifact from when I was building this up in my notebook, because I think when I was working with this in the notebook, I was doing some filtering before I graphed it out. And there were some cases where you would end up with an empty data frame. And so the strategy that I chose to deal with that is, if you notice what I'm looking at here, I'm not tying directly to a dcc.graph. I'm actually tying to a div. And that's because I wanted there to be a way to deal with edge cases where it doesn't make sense to draw a graph, and instead just display a message saying something like, there are no trees of this type, or something like that. So what I actually so you could see I sort of wrapped most of this function in an if statement. So if it's not equal to 0, I build the visualization, and I'm actually returning the dcc.graph itself, not just returning the figure within the graph. And otherwise, and I forgot to add my Bronx renaming there, but otherwise you're returning a header just saying there's no certain type of species in the in there. So it's sort of that's basically showing an error message. So I'm going to try to speed things up because I think we're running out of time here. So basically, one strategy in terms of dealing with edge cases like this is to get creative with what you're interacting with. So here, most of the time you're going to be hooking directly into the graph component, but what I chose here was instead to hook into the div. And then just to get back to Chunhui's last question, or question before this, can I show how to connect the drop-down menu with different graphs? So so basically, Dash is centered around outputs. So with each of you can actually see I have two callbacks here. I have one for the pie graph and one for the inputs, or I'm sorry, one for the pie graph, one for the heat map, and basically you need a separate callback for each of these, but the inputs are allowed to be the same. So basically, I have in this case it's just the same inputs: the burrow dropdown and tree dropdown. So I have my Baron tree input coming in there. I have that same input coming in here, and they're heading to different outputs. So so yeah, Chenhui, to answer that question, if you want, and it's there's it might be a bit sort of unintuitive in the beginning, but basically like this is the way where you would have one drop down tied to two outputs. And I guess another way to sort of think of it is, Dash is meant to, have a separate output for each callback and then have multiple callbacks. Whereas if you're thinking of something like Shiny, Shiny has one server object. And within this server object, you could almost think of that as a, sort of mega callback, as sort of a, in using, trying to relate it to Dash terminology, you could think of that as one giant callback. So, looking at an app like this, you would perhaps, you know, you would perhaps have something like, multiple, so you would sort of put all of your, put everything in, one callback, and then, sort of control all of your logic within one function. And and so basically, so essentially, like, you have to have an output, sort of a callback for each output. But that's why sort of output is a single object like this, and then input is a list of objects. And it's and actually, just in terms of the development of Dash itself, there's I don't know how embryonic this is, but there's actually we're actually adding the ability to add multiple outputs. I actually personally I personally like the fact that you're forced to create one callback per output, because it keeps you a bit more organized in terms of the app, in terms of what you're creating. If you are trying to create a really complex app in Shiny, for example, you may like you may end up with sort of pretty disorganized code, because you have sort of different inputs, you have different outputs. You could have, and when we were going over Shiny, if you remember from my slides, I had sort of a diagram of inputs pointing to outputs. You could have, those sorts of webs could get pretty complicated, and if you're putting it all in one function, like that could be perhaps sort of messy, and something like having separate output callbacks. I just personally prefer it, but that's more of a preference thing. So,
Hello,
and
Professor.
yep.
This is
Hmm.
Jagruti.
Hi.
Hi. So I have a question here. Uh, could you please make me a presenter, because I can only show you on my dash.
Do you mind if we save the question for the end? Because I just want to quickly, because since we are running towards the end, I just want to first discuss the final project, and then Jagruti, I'll let you
Oh,
present.
sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
So yeah, so we're sort of approaching the end here. So I'll do Q&A for module 4 a bit later, but so for final projects, we have, because I want to make sure I get through this, since it's a pretty big percentage of your grade. So for the final project proposal, it's meant to be very open-ended. like even before when we were talking about, different sort of data types, like someone mentioned, they want to use sports data, and that's, I'll allow that, even though it might not, it's, you have a lot of, flexibility in terms of the, sort of data that you choose. And so, basically for the for the final project, you guys will be choosing your data set, and it could be, again, any data set you want, and then, sort of go through, your process. So if you are using something like D3, or something like Shiny or Python, and, you have a messy data source that you need to clean up before it's ready for the app. And you could use, whatever you want to do any of these steps. So you could, if your final project, you choose to create a Dash app, you could, clean up the data using R, create CSVs, and create a Dash app that's reading in those CSVs. You could create a Dash app that's reading directly from an API and doing everything within Python. You could use Python, sort of use a notebook to clean up your data, and then just have D3 reading from a CSV. So, any combination, or any combination I didn't mention, obviously. So you could, so like you have the freedom to choose that. One thing I will mention in terms of the final project is I use, I am, and apologies, but I am behind in grading, but I will be prioritizing the final project proposals. So you guys will be getting those back, the week, sort of the following week, from when you submit them. And part of what I'm going to be, sort of including in my, I'm going to sort of be like, I'll provide some pretty detailed feedback in terms of, what my thoughts are on how a project could work. For the proposal, you don't have to, hand in, like, a mini project or something like that. But some things that the sorts of feedback I most commonly give is, sort of questioning, like, what, sort of whether the data could work, like, given the goal. So for example, this is a pretty common one, like a lot of people end up using some more geographically focused data. And the like one thing to I purposefully don't really cover mapping, because there's, again, that could in itself be another course. But but like a lot of students like to use maps for their final project, and maps are cool. So definitely, don't not use geographic data if you were planning on doing so. But using that as an example, geographic data is pretty hard to reconcile with each other. If you have data on school districts, for example, and you're looking to relate that to data on congressional districts, or data on some other geographic division, it's you're going to like, obviously school districts aren't going to map perfectly for those divisions, and school districts aren't going to map to congressional districts, and really, and then even things like, if you're dealing with like pretty much anything sub county level, if you're dealing with metro areas, metros can include, like New York City is technically 5 counties. So there's, and the New York City metro area includes counties in, Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. So there's lots of weird quirks of geographic data that, that in a proposal, it may seem like, a good idea to go down a certain route, but there's there may be issues with these sorts of reconciliations. So so that's one sort of an example of what I could of one of the more common sorts of things that I comment on. Sarah asked, is the final project an individual or group project? Usually, in the past, it's mainly been individual, and I framed it as individual. And actually, before now, I haven't had anyone try to propose a group project. I'm not opposed to that. Is there so like just everyone else on the call does anyone else would anyone else prefer to do a group project or have any thoughts on that? I know for other classes and like other classes, it could be a mix. Some classes allow individuals, some allow group projects. Yeah, so Sarah, it's created, it's sort of mostly, like done individually. But as I mentioned, I'm not like, I don't really see a reason why it can't be a group project. For a group project, I would, expect a bit more complexity than for an individual project. But aside from that, I can't really think of any sort of, I can't think of any reason why it wouldn't be a group project. And especially if there are any sort of people who worked on group projects previously, and you work well together, that could definitely work out. So yeah, Sarah, if you do have sort of a particular group in mind, like if if you've worked with people in the past, or if if you sort of have a specific idea in mind, email me, and I'll and that goes for anyone else as well. Email me if you want to work on a group project. Like I said, I don't really see a reason to sort of forbid group projects. So definitely, if people prefer working that way, I'll allow that. So yeah, we'll see what happens there, and then in terms of getting back to what I was mentioning about the proposal, the like I don't want you to do you don't have to do too much work, like it's for the proposal, but like at least like I would say, sort of inspect the data, or at least think about sort of how this data would work in the way that you're envisioning, and sort of try to, think of, don't actually sort of create the final project to do this, but, just sort of try to think through, try to think like, I want to do X with Y data, try to think through ways that could perhaps, fail, and or that could perhaps, like, your strategy would not, you may have to change your strategy. But either way, like, the proposal is like, this is meant to be a pretty fluid sort of workflow. So I'm like, I'll definitely be providing feedback for the proposals. The feedback, a lot of times, I'll specifically mention sort of a direction to go in for assignment 6, which is going to be in service of the final project. So for assignment 6, the I may specifically say, hey, this data, it seems like you might have issues with the specific methodology you laid out. Here is, and I'll give you my thoughts, and I'll sort of say, try to use assignment 6 to work this out. And then for assignment 6, similarly, it's not, assignment 6, it's not meant to be your final project. it's meant to be something more static, more, just sort of giving everyone a bit more practice with these tools, and also something to, sort of get everyone that much more sort of oriented towards their final project as we approach the end of the semester. So before I give Jagruti, I make her presenter, any other questions about the final project?
Hey, it's Kelly.
Hi.
I have a question about the overall grading structure for the course now, but if we don't have time for that, I can just shoot you an email.
Yeah, it seems like that might be a quick question. Is it about the number of assignments?
It's pretty much, since you added a module, I'm just wondering if you're dropping 2 assignments now instead of the 1, or if the breakdown per assignment is changing now and we still have the 1 drop, or which ones are eligible for the drop, and kind of that structure. The syllabus was a little vague, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah, and also so I purposely didn't address this yet. Because I added, I sort of added the module in the middle of the course. So it's I'm leaning towards one, like there'll still be 1 drop, but I'll just and the proportions will remain the same. So before the assignments were 10 points each, we'll just that'll be 8 points each now. We'll sort of prorate the sort of proportionally assign the assignments. I'll still be grading them out of 10, but because that's just a better round number. But so it'll still be 1 drop, but but everything will sort of proportionally fit in the same place. So the final project will still be worth the same, and proportionally, whatever you end up with on the assignments, that'll still work out in that way.
Gotcha. Just each assignment will be worth less toward the grade now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Yeah, that was it. Thanks.
Cool. And anything else before I hand this off to Jagruti? Cool. So Jagruti, I'm going to make you the presenter.
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
Okay. So are you able to see my screen?
I am.
Yeah. So as I'm lagging behind on this assignment, I made the first question visible through the dash, but the issue I'm facing is that what my structure was, for each borough I wanted to get trees accordingly and then shift the percentage, but I'm not getting it through dash. I mean, for a single tab and then multiple input output, is there any documentation regarding that in dash or plotly or any forum which I could use as a reference point here?
So I'm sorry. I'm still not quite getting what's happening. So you're saying like the tabs. Oh, the tabs just simply aren't changing, or?
These are changing, but these are according to boroughs. But you also needed it according to species, right? Species of plants.
Yeah. Yep.
So what I was thinking is the user will select Manhattan and then he can select whatever spaces he want, and then the graph will go accordingly. This is fine. This is going good, but I wanted to add more to it, and I couldn't find any documentation which allows me to give more input output in a single tab. I mean, for Manhattan it's different, and for Brooklyn it's different. So
Okay.
can you help me with any documentation or any suggestion which I could go forward with?
Yeah, there's not. So there's not a specific like there. Someone probably asked this in the Plotly community, the Plotly Dash community, but so basically like what you're looking to do here. So the so basically you have your tabs, and this is like actually personally I still don't really like the way, I still don't like the way tabs have been implemented, just simply
Yeah,
because
yeah.
there's more of a, you more likely end up with situations like this. But
Yes.
basically, yeah, and like so, so for anyone who didn't use tabs, tabs are actually treated similarly to drop downs. So,
Mhm.
each tab has a value, and then depending on that value, sort of show different content. But, tabs are usually, for lack of a better term, tabs are usually, and actually, yeah, Jagruti, I am seeing a, so Natalie mentioned something in the chat,
Oh, is it?
and there's actually another, as I was talking about this, there is a,
Okay, okay, I got it.
um, shoot, where is it?
Documentation some sort? Yeah.
I'm not remembering where this is. I think, um, shoot, yeah, I'll have to find it, but I've definitely, but yeah, so basically the documentation that I'm thinking of is, like, so some like tabs are treated like drop downs, but when, in terms of like the design of an app like this, tabs are
Mm.
usually going to be like, sort of sitting above whatever other selectors you have.
Oh,
So yeah, so basically, like with my drop downs, I didn't run into this issue because I just had two drop downs and they're working simultaneously.
mm-hmm.
But for a but for tabs, the when you choose a tab, like so basically the way to do this is you create your, you sort of have your tabs, and then so like if you saw with my app, I was returning children rather than like interacting with the actual graph. and
Okay.
and what you'd actually have to do is essentially, you know, you you'll have, so basically your app design will be, you have your tabs and you have sort of this div that is meant to be a, mega div, sort of a larger div for lack of a better term. And within that div, you're essentially going to be building like a more complex layout. So,
Mm.
when a user chooses Manhattan, you're
Yeah.
essentially building like a mini app that,
Mm-hmm.
that includes a drop down,
Mm-hmm.
that includes, sort of,
Tabs and
like
drop
populating
downs
that
and
drop
pop-up.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what my thinking was when I started designing that I'll get these five tabs of each borrows and then hello.
Yeah. You're still here. I'm
Yeah.
still hearing you.
Yeah, so design each tab and then as there were numerous species more than 100, I could just use them in a drop down menu. But to coincide these two, it's taking me like a lot of effort, but it is not getting done correctly. Maybe I need more documentation. I'll go through it what Natalie suggested and I'll work on it again.
Yeah. Let me try to, there's a, there's a particular, not this. Yeah, I'll have to try to find it. I'm not remembering where precisely it was, but there's a, we have sort of a simpler example where, where you're able to see that. And let me, here. So, yeah, Jagruti, I'm going to make myself presenter again.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So yeah, that's something that, like I mentioned, like in my opinion, I still, is everyone seeing my screen?
Yeah.
Cool. So that's something that um, yeah, I'm not remembering where exactly this is, but I'll find it and I'll post it. Um, I'll post it in the Ask the Instructor forum. But basically, we have a simpler example where that works. And then I know we have people for 7:45 coming in, but for those of you here from section 1, are there any questions on module 4.5? Ideally, and I'll post, I'll sort of merge what I ended up adding, but basically I'm not going to try to fit it into however many seconds I have, but if anyone has a question about module 4.5, I'll answer it. And if not, I'll ask in the Ask the Instructor forum or email me, and I'll sort of deal with those questions then. And what I'll probably also do is I may, and because there's a few things outstanding, I may just put out an announcement with sort of how to deal with tabs and with some more information on module 4.5. Yeah, Natalie mentioned she ditched tabs also. I personally just don't like how it's implemented, just because they're treated like drop downs, and it's really it's easy to get confused in that way. Although I don't really I sort of don't like it, but I also don't really know of a better way to do that. So it's not like at least I don't see like sort of an obvious solution for something like that. So for those in section 2,